And if something isn't working, how do I start reimagining what will?
Yeah.
Relationships that thrive are customized. Careers that thrive are customized. Friendships that thrive are customized. That it's not just, this is who I was friends with when I was 5, and so I'm going to be friends with them forever if it doesn't work. There's constant like evolution and adapting and refiguring, right? Or reconfiguring is better, like what will work. And so my hope is, right, as new couples come into being, is like, rather than being reactive to what doesn't work, is starting to really be explorative around what will.
Yeah.
And giving yourself permission to be like, you know what is it that I really need to feel, to fully step into me, right? And to fully step into us.
Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. I am here today with Dr. Jasmonae Joyriel, and she is here to talk about some stuff that we haven't actually talked about on the podcast yet, which I'm really excited about. But before we get started, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. Oh, I am so excited. I read your bio again before I started the whole recording thing. Was like, yes, please. So how about we start with you introducing yourself and what you do and those parts and pieces and go from there.
Yeah. So a little bit about me is I'm a licensed psychologist and sex therapist. I really started in the area of trauma and working with trauma, really loved working with couples. And in doing all of that work, realized we don't do a lot in learning about sex and eroticism and intimacy. And so that has just kind of all blended together into this beautiful place where I'm at in my life, where I have a private practice and still work in all of those areas. But most recently, expanded into doing retreats and workshops that I just, I say like important conversations just don't happen in therapy. They can happen anywhere and they should be happening everywhere. And so I think that's become a little bit of my mission, is to bring these conversations out of the therapy room and into your life. So
I love that. I love the idea of it's one of those things where people just sort of, they put it in a little bubble and it exists in its own little space. But there's always got to be, I feel like there always has to be all of the parameters have to be lined up in order to approach this bubble of conversation.
yes.
Just with that, but literally everything else in the world is like Kate Middleton has surgery because she has cancer, and the world is like, that is my business, right? But
yeah.
it's they want to know all about that, but you're like, what about your own stuff? How about you unpack a little bit of your own stuff and leave her alone? I mean, I'm just
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I think even being a psychologist, that when I do work, it's kind of funny where I realized when I first stepped out into doing retreats that, oh, I'm everybody's mistress.
Yeah.
My clients don't tell their friends that they're seeing me. They come to my office. They let me take care of them and hold them, and then they put me in this teeny tiny little box on the back of their shelf. And that's not all of my clients, but there are some clients that were like, nobody knows that I'm seeing you. And I was like, wow, what does that say about where we're at in our lives and how how comfortable we feel when we're going through something, and this is both erotically or non-erotically, that it feels like I couldn't say that I'm doing this work, that I couldn't have these conversations. And yeah, it's pretty it's pretty mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, like so much of that, I believe that so much of that comes from like our experience throughout our life, right? Like we don't just sort of have
Yeah.
this idea that's fully formed. It's like where we come from and how the pieces go. Like I remember when my oldest was, oh, I don't know, 5, maybe 4. I don't know. And
Mhm.
she started asking because I was pregnant with I must have been pregnant with my third. And she was let's talk about like how this all occurred, right? Like there was the stork never happened in my house or anything like that. But I remember like she asked questions and I was just sort of like, well, what, like, just answer the questions, right? And like all of those pieces are very
Mhm.
multi-layered and there's like emotional dimensions and physical dimensions and all of those pieces and how they all weave together.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I'm like, well, she just wants to know like what is happening physically, which leads
Yeah.
to me having a conversation, the first conversation with my daughter about sex in the cereal aisle at the grocery store. And there's like there's like people walking by and I'm like, using all anatomically correct terms and all of this stuff and they're like, "Oh my god." I'm like, "This is how we all got here." Like, I mean,
Yeah.
various whatever methods and technologies and all of that stuff, but like relatively speaking, A plus B equals baby, right? Like that's how it
Mhm.
has to work.
Yeah.
No.
I think it's funny because like one of the things I talk about is like people will get red if they hear the word vulva, but I'm like, if I say the word arm,
Mhm.
you don't think twice about it. You're just like, "Oh, okay." If I say leg and I'm like telling you about the different tendons and ligaments and types of bones that like go into your leg, it's like, "Oh, okay." But if we start talking about sex or genitals, then it's like and it's like and so much of that is like those feelings would not exist if you got used to saying them. If you were able to like adequately describe
Mhm.
what are these body parts, what they do, and then more importantly, like how are you in control of them, that they do not control you, that you should feel empowered,
Right.
right? And I think that's a part that is often missing, is that if I acknowledge any of this, then I will be like a slave or like beholden to these body parts versus like when I'm not dysregulated and I'm not anxious and I'm not afraid and I'm not, ignorant, like where I'm not lacking knowledge, I can make really informed decisions.
Mhm. And that's what we
And
want. Yeah.
absolutely, right? Like I mean everywhere we go we're like slow down, don't rush, think it through. And that's the only place where we don't think it through. We're like, nope, let's not talk about it. Let's just like figure it out when it comes to it and it'll be fine. And
Mhm.
it's like how many times have we made impulsive decisions and it's been fine? Like, like really, like let's think about that. Like, how often does that happen?
Right.
Not much, right?
Yeah.
And to make informed decisions, you have to be informed.
And that's too like having this like othering experience of one part of yourself is this weird like it's like that weird like black box, not being able to talk about those things and not being able to address those things, but also not feeling like you have somebody that you can reach out to and talk about that, which I'm sure like
Yeah.
people are like, I imagine that people that find you and begin to work with you are people that have felt like that all exists in its own little echo chamber, and now there's someone who's like got a flashlight, right? Who's like, no, 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 like let's open
Yeah.
this up a little, let's put a little light on it, and let's have these conversations. Throw some information in there, and take like the shame, maybe take the secrecy, take the vulnerability out of it and put in education, acknowledgement, acceptance, like all of those pieces to bring that into being a part of you.
Yeah. So I think what happens, right, is when you don't have information, like you can't feel grounded. Like I don't know if you've gone into like a class, right? Like I think about math. If I like went into like a I don't know, a quantum physics course, I would be sitting here sweating bullets because I'd be like, I don't know, like what is all of this? Right. And I feel really overwhelmed
Mm-hmm.
because it's like so far outside of like my wheelhouse and my range, that's often how we approach sex and eroticism. And then on top of that is any of the stigma, shame, misinformation we have been given, right? So if I've been taught to either dissociate from my body and any urges or feelings that I have, that I don't explore them, I don't figure out what they mean to me, then that also means I don't figure out my boundaries, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't figure out my desires. And if I have a lot of shame, then when I do feel those, then I'm also going through this process of fighting with myself that this is wrong, that this is not okay. And I think the stark contrast then is like I get into a relationship where I get married, depending on, what my values were growing up. And I am now wanting to or needing to engage in this space, right? And in the erotic playhouse. And I'm dissociating, I'm dysregulated, I'm disconnected. I can't find my voice. I don't know how to communicate boundaries or consent or pleasure or desire. And then really confused like why this is such either a mediocre, unmemorable, or a very violating
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the consequence of not having conversations like these, not going through that process. So when clients come into my office, it really starts with like normalizing this as part of like empowerment, that like talking about sex does not make you go out and have sex. Talking about sex makes you informed and empowered to make better decisions in relation to your erotic life.
Mm-hmm.
That you start to learn how to create dynamic consent with a partner where it's not just this binary yes or no, but what do I want today in the here and now? That maybe yesterday I wanted you to fill me up and kiss on my neck. And then tomorrow, I just want you to cuddle me. And rather than me saying it has to be all or nothing, I can really get into these nuanced spaces that allow me to stay connected to myself and connected to my partner
Mm-hmm.
and connected to my voice.
And
That's what I do.
I love that. I think
Yeah.
that's amazing because it is something that, they talk about when you talk about like mismatch in expectations leading to issues, leading to problems, leading to like a whole big tornado of stuff when it comes to relationships and how things change. But if you have the ability to communicate on that level about anything and being able to like connect with each other on whatever it is, and that is definitely part of the menu of things to talk about, then you're going to move into a space where as things change and as people change and as you grow over time, that it still meets both needs or wants.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even like expectations, it's very rare that anybody is exactly the same, right?
Oh God, I hope
And
not.
so right? But I think oftentimes we expect that, right? When it comes to like sex or it comes to some other places, like it's almost like we're looking for like a clone of ourselves, or that's what we're told we're gonna find versus like, no, absolutely. That's not gonna be the case.
Mm-hmm.
But what you are looking for is collaboration and integration. And the only way to do that is to really truly know yourself, right? And then being willing and able to listen to your partner. And so when I'm coming into a space like, within whether it's a new partner, whether it's the same partner, is that one, things evolve over time. So things that I liked, again, yesterday or before I was a parent or when I was in my 20s or before I had, a serious illness are not going to be the things that I may like after those moments.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And same with my partner. Um, an example I might give right outside of sex would be like careers. When I am by myself, I could have all the dreams of what I want to do for work, where I want to live, what I want to be, what my trajectory is. And all of that has to evolve and shift and adapt when I meet somebody that I want to build a life with. Right. And if I'm going to like really bring this person into this space, it's no longer about just what I want to do for my job, even if I'm casually dating, right? So maybe like I could work 80 hours a week. Well, suddenly now I want to spend time with the person. It's like, oh, wait, maybe I don't want to work 80 hours a week. Maybe I want to work 40, or, oh, you know what? I typically was working this shift and now I want to try to like work this shift so we can hang out here. That I start to adjust and adapt what my expectations were to what our expectations need to be. And I think that that same model has to be put into the erotic,
Mhm.
right? Where what I thought I wanted maybe for myself is not going to be the exact same. And the more that I know about myself, the more that I can say, oh, these are the things that are really, truly important core values of mine. And here's where I want to adapt or adjust, right? Just like that job is, I may not want to leave my career field, but I definitely may change the trajectory of what I was going to do before I got into a serious relationship. And we can't do that if we aren't informed.
Mhm. And I think too, like that's the important, like it's so fundamental is to know exactly who you are in as many ways as possible, and how that your yeses and your nos, your the hard ones, and then being able to weave those things through. And I think that that's something that happens so often where you find these conflict pieces or pockets because there is that like unexplored hard yeses and hard nos, and how do they line up together. And so how does that, I mean, because we talk about this is a motherhood podcast, how do you find, because I think that this happens a lot, especially when
Yeah.
you move into parenthood. I think like it's a whole different level, it's a whole different layer of the onion when you put that on top of it. And so how do you find that as a thing or common themes that you see? Because you do work with couples, and I'm assuming that you work with couples maybe before and after, or after they become parents and there's conflict that arises. So what are some of the things that like maybe you see, I guess, as themes?
So I think there's different stages of parenthood. And so I think the first one is when you become a new mother, right? I think there are a couple things that happen depending on how you come into motherhood, whether you are adopting using a surrogate or you yourself go through your pregnancy. And one is like reconnecting to your body, that so many things shift and change. Things that again that you used to love, you may not love. One joke I make is like, I remember a couple that was in that, used to use the word like mommy. And that was a cute pet name until she actually became mommy. And it was like, oh, that doesn't feel good anymore. That is no longer sexy.
It's my name 99% of the day. Thank you. No, thank you.
Right? So the name I may want to be called now, and I'll use my own name, is like, I want to be called Jasmonae. I do not want to be called mommy in this space. And it can be and it really is like that big of a spectrum from like things that turned me on and things I found desirable, but all the way to like the way my body has changed,
Mhm.
right? And falling back in love with that. Noticing I may have new curves or things that used to be comfortable are no longer comfortable, or things that weren't comfortable are now comfortable. And and so I think that's the process where I start with mothers is like, how have you evolved through that stage from before you became a mother to after you became a mother? And really like, who are you erotically? Like, who do you want to be erotically? That I think another challenge that can happen sometimes is that sort of unintentionally you just get like fused with the role of mother
Mhm.
and forgetting that like I am mother and I am Jasmine.
Yeah.
And so there's mother, and there's a whole exploration of like, how do I want to be as a mother and who do I want to be as a mother? Right? How do I feel empowered in that identity? But then this other identity that has to be separate from that, because that is where the erotic lives, right? That is where sensuality and desire live, is this place where it's like, I'm not this nurturing caretaker, but like I am stepping into my own space and fully indulging in my needs, my wants, my pleasures. And that I think is really important to realize, like those still have to exist separately,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's not too much that is sexy or erotic about
No.
nurturing. It's beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's breathtaking, but it's not sexy. And so that's where I often start.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's this other part of potentially like digging into work of like, what does sex mean to you? Like, how do you define it? What's its purpose? What's its function? Did you ever really enjoy it just for yourself? Or was it always a means to an end? Like, this is how I date. This is how I get married. This is how I have a child. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm obligated to do this to make my partner, satisfied. Or was there a part of like, this is for me?
Mm-hmm.
And if that doesn't exist, it's even to me that becomes even more important because you're giving so much of yourself now that maybe before was like, okay, like if I don't have to really think about this being for me because I'm focused on, all these other things, but I have these other places where I can come back and fulfill my needs. But now I'm literally every other part of my life is going to others. If I'm going to work, it's going to my employer or my business. If it's my relationship, it's going to my partner. It's going to my children. So now I really need to have spaces where it's like, what is for me? What is solely for my pleasure, my satisfaction, like for me to feel satiated. And I would say a lot of I think women in general, but especially mothers, really struggle with that.
Yes, on the inside, because, I'm trying to keep a quiet, calm recording space, but on the inside, there are fireworks going off in my head of like, oh my God, yes. And it's
I
because
love it.
it's because this is the thing that like, this is why I started this podcast is like, you are a whole person. You are also a mom. But so much of what the message that gets like waterboarded at us is that once you become a mom, all the things in service of motherhood are supposed to have this trickle down effect in the rest of your life, right? Like
Mhm.
you have, you're like the kids are growing and developing and they're healthy and all that stuff. Don't you feel good about yourself? And you're like, well, in order to get
Yeah.
them to be there, I'm the one pouring the buckets out. And
Yeah.
then, motherhood in how it all looks on the outside, this is an attractive thing. And so therefore that should be fulfilling that need that you have in order for
Yeah.
someone to find you attractive, in order for you to like be a desirable person. And you're like, listen, like me serving up fruit snacks is not hot. Like me serving up fruit
Yeah.
snacks is
It's
trying to
it's
keep
not.
people alive.
Yeah. And it also isn't, like it fills a certain place,
Mhm.
but it doesn't feel every place,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I think that's the part when we think about the whole is like you have these different aspects of your identity, right? There's my financial identity, my spiritual identity, my professional identity, right? My identity as a friend, my identity as a lover, my identity as a daughter. And all of those different identities come together to make a whole. So to now say, here's this new identity, the identity of mother, and that should fill in all the rest of those
Mhm.
gaps. It's like that just doesn't happen. It can't happen. It like there are some parts that just literally are oppositional, right?
Mhm.
Like something like sex and eroticism in some ways is very selfish because it's about me, right? It's about me being the priority, which is completely opposite of being a mother, which is about you,
Yeah.
which is about me being selfless.
Mhm.
And so if that identity is supposed to cover all of these identities when it comes to being fulfilled, you're already losing.
Yeah, I mean, there's not enough, right? Like it's like
Yeah.
you have all these buckets, but you just don't have enough tokens to put in all the buckets.
Right.
And
And some of the tokens are shaped differently. Like it cannot go in it. Like even if you had enough, like it can't go in the bucket because it's like that just is not that shape does not fit.
that shape is not meant for that bucket. Yeah, I I love that idea of, just sort of helping people to understand that like the message of, this all consuming role does not mean that it is an all fulfilling role or fulfilling
Yeah.
all role. And that I think too, like it's really important, especially because I think about like people that have had a prolonged journey of trying to conceive, right? Like you go
Hmm.
through the process of, you spend how many years of your life trying not to get pregnant. And then you
Yeah.
spend how many years? I saw a thing, it was an interview or it was a quote of it from an interview, and someone was interviewing a OBGYN, and they were saying like, I spend the first 10 years that I know a patient trying to keep them from getting pregnant, and then sometimes I spend the next 15 trying to help them get pregnant, and it's just like this
Yeah.
weird thing, right? And so whether or not you conceive a child through sex or you conceive them through various technologies or surrogacy or whatever, I feel like that piece, that pursuit or that goal in mind is this thing that can totally strip away so much of the intimacy and the the like connection that you can have, because when you
Yeah.
have people that are trying for years and years to have babies, or they go through the IVF process or the IUI process and all of that stuff, is you've got people who are like, this is a thing that we used to do together that maybe it did fill all those needs and we were in a good space, but now it's just become this mechanical thing because
Yeah.
it's
It's a
the
job.
means. Yeah, this is now the job, and it feels very Handmaid's Tale in a non-Handmaid's Tale kind of way. But the idea is like,
Hmm.
how do you go from where you were to then where you are? And then for however it happens, you have a child. Now, how do you circle back? Because there might be this prolonged period where it's like, okay, it's Tuesday. I like took this test and all this stuff and like, yay. You know what I mean? Like, how do you come
Yeah.
back to that piece that you had in the beginning?
So I take a little bit of, and this may be a radical approach, which I start with even like what it means to be a mother.
Mm.
Like I don't think we have enough conversations about that. So we did this episode I think last season on our podcast where we talked about the difference between the experience of wanting to be pregnant, wanting to have a family, and wanting to be a mother. And how that shifts, right? Your your motivations, your actions, like and what the function of finding a partner, you know, feeling erotic, like experiencing pleasure, how it looks different. But I think something comes into like what does that mean for you first? Because that to me is part of that drive of like when we're trying and it becomes this like just job is there's something really significant, right? And if that isn't really sort of explored and understood, then everything gets lost behind that.
Mhm.
Everything gets lost. Like we're going, but we don't really know how we got here or what's making us go here and what's driving. And we're not then being able to really fully consider the other pieces of ourselves and keeping that balance. And so knowing like what does it mean to become a mother, right? Like what is it that this is going to do? Like and being able to explore like, oh, am I doing this because I've always wanted to raise a child? Am I doing this because I think this is what is makes a complete family? I'm doing this because I feel the pressure that everybody else is having kids and now I need to have kids because there's this timeline or, you know, I'm doing this because it needs to be my biological child versus me being having the ability to adopt. Like whatever it may be is like first understanding that and then like what is the part that is our relationship, right?
Mhm.
So if we're looking at like from a married context or a partnered context is how does that play into our relationship as a whole, right? Do we see this as just one phase and this makes the relationship too, or is it there's this part of this new place we're trying to get into but there's also this relationship and then how do we feed that, right? That always being able to keep that in balance. And so rather than it being very reactive or sort again that place of like I say impulsivity where we're just kind of on this hamster wheel, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing is at the beginning we start to think about, okay, like how do we want to keep this in balance?
Yeah.
If we know what parenthood means to us, we know what motherhood means to us, right? And then figuring out like what does the relationship mean? What does our erotic life mean to us? And then being like, how do we check in? And so rather than and I think things just shift, right? If we're not paying attention, like, like a boat, if a boat's not anchored in, it just goes where the wind goes. And I think that is what happens so often in relationships is that we just followed down this path. And then before we knew it, that's all we were consumed with.
Mm-hmm.
And we never paused. We never set an anchor to be like, wait, how do we want this path to go? Like, where could this path go? What are the things that we're okay with sacrificing? What are the things that we absolutely need? What are the things that if we sacrifice, maybe we know we want to put a lot of effort into recovering on the back end? And that helps you survive, I think, not only difficulties, but also really staying somewhat grounded in the foundation of the relationship.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure. I think too, like the point of recovery is important, and whether or not it is a prolonged experience or it is
Yeah.
a short one or it is unexpected or whatever it is, that the acknowledgement and the communication around the fact that there is a recovery that has to happen, because it is, it's like you have all these pieces and then you take this big giant wedge, and it could be the
Yeah.
the best thing ever and the thing that you wanted and you've all worked towards and stuff like that, but it's still a wedge, and you have to acknowledge the wedge for what it is. And then there is a recovery, there's a resettling, a reshuffling of where all of these parts and pieces go. But like,
Yeah.
fundamentally, all of this comes back to communication.
It does. I think it's both an awareness of yourself and permission to evolve in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we're not staying static, and we do change, and the things we want change, and the things we need change over time. But I think initially is like awareness. Like I really need to be aware of myself and being able to have some really. I mean, they're not always the most comfortable conversations, but they are important conversations. And then like permission to evolve, right? And I think that permission to evolve allows me to then do that communication,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where as things are changing, that I can then come back, right? And rather than it being this really isolated process, is being like, you know what? Maybe I didn't think I was going to be here. I didn't think I was going to feel this way. And I'm starting to realize this is where I'm at,
Yeah.
you know? And being able to then invite my partner, my spouse into that space and being like, okay, have things changed for you? You know, how is this for you? And I think ultimately, right? Because I think I'm coming from what a lot of my clients are, is like they want to stay together, right? I don't have couples who come to see me that are looking to like, oh man, I just can't wait to like, I need you to help us. Like, oh, like it may end up being that way where they say, hey, yeah, I think we're going to. But that's not the goal of couples therapy. Couples therapy is we want to stay together. And so I think from my perspective is like constantly thinking about how do we keep this link intact, and part of that link is pleasure. Even if it's not erotic, it's pleasure with each other, right? How do we have fun with each other? How do we stay connected to each other? How do we keep a bit of that like just magic alive? I think, I mean, she's a phenomenal therapist, but Esther Perel talks a lot about, she wrote a book called Mating in Captivity, and is like the long term of being in a relationship and being able to survive these ebbs and flows of long-term partnership. And that is something we just don't dig into deep enough.
Yeah.
And and I mean, we could be going into a completely different space than just motherhood, but the impact of not really thinking about those ebbs and flows is that we get off course and then we lose that connection. And then, right, like the responsibilities, the obligations of being a parent, a mother, completely blind us because you're just like in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't live in villages anymore where originally parents were supposed to have 30% of like the load. And you shared the rest of the load, the rest of the 70% with family and friends, where kids ran from house to house in their little, from their villages. And like you really did it. That's how we raise children. And now your village is a village of two.
Yeah.
And oftentimes a village of two who also work. And so it is a mountain that parents are climbing nowadays, and climbing oftentimes with very little, like,
It's like
I think
visibility.
about like a fog.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Visibility.
It's like Everest with no oxygen tank. But like everyone's standing
Absolutely.
at base camp going, "Are you there yet? Why are you not there yet?
Yeah.
You should be climbing faster." I climb faster, and it's like, you're down there with the village, and I'm up here dragging all my worldly possessions and my people with me,
Yeah.
and I can't see where I'm going.
Right.
And God, I hope I don't fall off a cliff.
And I don't
Like-
have walkie-talkies to talk to my partner.
Yeah, no hand signals, no.
No. That is the state right now that we
Yeah.
are in.
And I think too, like so often that there is this internalization that people do of like, and this is what happens. And this is again, another thing that I love to talk about is like, because we don't talk about things, like generally so many things that occur and changes that happen in parenthood, is that there's really this idea of like, you look around and you get everyone's Instagram page and you get everyone's like forward facing PR view. And so the tendency is to internalize when it comes to wrong or a mismatch or needing to recalibrate, is that you look around, you're like, well, how come everyone else has it all figured out? And like, these people are fine, but like, are they fine?
Yeah.
Like, why?
I don't think anybody on Instagram is fine. Oftentimes we go to Instagram when we need to numb. Like it's very rarely that we're going to Instagram or another platform to like actually learn something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it does happen, but and I think maybe people are trying to do it more, but I think for a lot of times you go there when it's like, oh my God, I just need to like escape.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm gonna go. There's so I whenever I have clients who are becoming moms, I always give them two different books, and they're very different because I'm like, I want you to have like a sober idea of like what motherhood both is but can be. And one's sort of like off cuff and it's saucy. It's by Ali Wong.
Yeah.
And it's Dear Girls. And I love it because I think it's like a really honest blend of like who she is as a woman, but also like the ideas of what she wants for her daughters and like being able to keep that intact. Like girls become mothers, right? And so what is it that we're modeling so that they become the women that, for little girls is like they become the women that we hope for them to be. But then the other one is Untamed by Glennon Doyle.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it that she gives this, it is a beautiful account of her own journey of when she tried to completely immerse herself as like my identity is mother versus mother is one of my identities. That I have multiple identities that are important and that are valuable. And there's one chapter specifically when she's like talking to her daughter and she's putting her to sleep and she's like, I realized at that point that this can't be everything. Right. And for a couple of different reasons. One, that if we do our job well, that we want our kids to go off and succeed and start their lives and have their adventures and be their own people. But like that becomes really hard if that is all you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because what that means is when they do that, you are no more. And I think you can see that in like older generations of mothers who really struggle, where they're like, I put all of who I am into my kids. I lost my marriage. I don't know who I'm married to anymore. I don't know who my friends are anymore. I don't know who I am anymore. Like, I laid all of those identities to rest the moment I picked up this new one.
Mm-hmm.
And that is heartbreaking.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too that is the impossibility of that position, is that we are sold and expected that that position is the one that will fulfill us. However, that position benefits everybody but us. And then at the end of the day, if you want to fight against that status of, or not status, if you want to fight against that through line of, you know, I wrote a blog about why do we ask little girls. I wrote a blog about why do we ask little girls what they want to be when they grow up if they get to a certain point, and then you start asking them like, when are you going to settle down? When are you going to get married? And when are you going to start a family? However, at the same time, all those questions are being asked. They are graduating. They are figuring out what they want to do for a career. They are starting a career. They're going to graduate school. They're doing all of these things. And so why it's like talking out of both sides of your mouth. Like you're saying to them, you be an individual and be independent and all of those things. And then on the other end, it's like, but you have to fulfill this predetermined path. And like, if you want to do all of those other things, that's great. However, don't screw this up, because don't screw up motherhood. Don't stop. Don't whatever. And so that's when you get into that cross of like, you can do all the things and you can be all the things. You just have to do all the things. Like you have to pack that backpack and drag it up Everest, because no one's going to help you do that. But you also have to be happy about that.
Yeah. It's funny because I think about like that, going back to that, what kind of mother do you want to be? And so I have a lunch that I do with some other entrepreneur mothers. And, one of the things I said I gave up was like, I gave up getting to school on time. Like that there was like this pressure around like, well, you have to do, I was like, it doesn't work for my schedule. It doesn't work for our schedule. And really being like, you know what, when I came down to like, what kind of mother do I want to be, is I want a mother who really knows how to have moments of being in the present. And that if I am going to follow these dreams and ambitions of mine, then my life, our life has to look different. Mm-hmm. And that I reject it. I reject the like, do all the things. I would like to figure out the things I would like to do.
Yes.
And those are the things that I do. I do all of those things. I don't do all of everything.
And that's that whole hustle culture piece, that it's like, you want to do all these things. Here, let me give you a menu. You can have all of these things, but you have to work harder and you have to give up more of yourself in order to make that happen, versus what you're doing, which is, I looked at the menu and I don't want all of it because I only have this much energy and I choose to put it in these buckets.
Yeah. And that I define what it means to be a mother, right? Like for me, like what it means to be a mother is that my little ones know, well, some of them are not so little anymore, but to me they are.
They'll always be little.
That they, yeah, but they know that like, I'm here. You can call me. I don't care what time of night it is. I don't care what it's for. Like you can call me, and I want you to call me, and I want you to talk to me, and I don't want you to be afraid that you're going to get in trouble for talking to me. And I want us to have fun. Sorry about that.
Oh, don't worry.
I'm also a dog mom.
Whole person here, dog and all.
Yeah, but like that, I want us to have memories of laughter, and I want to communicate to you that like this relationship's the thing that matters. Mm-hmm. The time, the grades, the wearing the right outfit, the being, perfectly presented in public. Like that's I guess cool. It's stressful to me, and it definitely seems stressful to my kids. But like the thing that like really matters is that you know and you feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so every decision that I make, I I compare it to that. That's the standard. And to me, it's like, okay, if we're rushing off to school, does that do anything to make you know and feel loved? Does it do anything for me to let you know that I love you? No. So if we're having a slow morning and it's not happening, then okay. What would allow you to know and feel loved is saying, okay, we're tardy. Cool. And if everybody else think that that makes me a bad mother, well, I mean, you weren't there when my son needed to be held, that he was having a meltdown because for whatever reason, this one curl in his hair is not curling. And so that's it. He's not going and it's the end of the world. And what he needed at that moment was just to be like, what's
Space.
going on?
Mm-hmm.
What's really going on? Not, I don't care. Just put it up and let's go because everybody else is going to judge me about being a good mother. But I want you and me to feel and have conversations about what it means
Mm-hmm.
to be a good mother, right? And that's you feeling love and me feeling like I am showing up for you.
Yeah. And that's permission for them to be present in their own self.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because what happens is when you are saying, okay, we have to go to school, we have to do this, we have to do this, then it's just running right up over top of things. That
Yeah.
that is again like what feeds into all of this, right? Is like if you are present within yourself and if you are aware of what you're feeling and why you're feeling that way, which you may or may not, depending on how old you are, but why you are feeling that way and listening to that and being able to speak to that and being able to speak that out loud, that's how you end up that not end up, but that's how you move through the world as your whole present self.
Yeah. And the great thing is like in doing that, like I don't have to worry about anybody else's standards. I think that's something I really encourage both in my work, but even for my own life is like it really starts with the defining, like what does it mean for me? What does motherhood mean for me, right? Going back to that of if you started at the beginning, but also like what kind of mother, what do I want my identity as a mother to be, right? We have, and I go into all the other spaces where it's like, again, I have a spiritual identity. What does that look like? I have a financial identity. What does that look like? What are my values around that? Like personally, not because somebody else told me they need to be that, but because I have defined those for myself. And the more that I have defined that, the more I have felt free and really enjoyed
Mhm.
and found balance in my motherhood journey.
I love that so very much. So when you have people, so you work with people individually and you work with couples, like how do you have people that typically start coming to see you individually and then move into that space? Or do you have people that see you as a couple? Or is there like a common trajectory that people follow? Because I'm curious about A, who shows up first?
Yeah.
And B, how quickly does that person go, hold on a second, we need to have a group chat about this. I thought this was one-on-one, but actually, like, we got to call in the other person.
Yeah. So I've actually done all different versions. I've started with like an individual and moved into couples. I've done like a sort of version of couples through individual where one person is just, they're just not at the process and ready. But like, there's a lot of stuff that's coming up in the relationship. And I think you start where you start.
Yeah.
So if there's one person who's like, hey, like, we keep on getting in these arguments and that person is not ready to come to therapy, then okay, like here, you can ask this question, and like, so I've done that sort of work of like doing an absent couples version of like thinking about like, well, how do you have conversations? How can you ask open-ended questions? And that's like just kind of giving some skills and strategies.
Mm-hmm.
There are couples who start out coming straight in. So it really is, I've definitely touched all of those and they have a different flavor to them and why we're moving into that space. I would say ultimately though, I think when you're doing couples work, what often happens is there's individual work that needs to be addressed or confronted. And so being able, I think it's where I find couples to be really effective and go through the fastest is when you have couples work, if it's accessible to you, and then you go to individual. Because what you do is you take the work that happens in couples therapy and then you can reprocess it in your own language with your own like experiences, any of your stuff that comes up in that moment, and really integrate it in a way that when you're doing couples, you can do it. It's just a slower process. And so I think the question is a little bit about like, how quickly do you want to be able to move into it? Because also couples is very dynamic, right? We're sharing space with each other and we both have our histories, our culture, our identity coming in with us, the things that we want. Couples often have slightly different motivations for why they come to therapy. And what they see as the crux of their problem is often slightly different as well. So it's always like balancing that out. There's often a person who is more comfortable with expressing their feelings and one that is less comfortable or who's more shy or avoidant. And so it's the interesting thing that oftentimes like couples will come and be like, hey, this is all the things that are happening. And they really want this person to engage. But then when this person starts engaging, they're actually like, they have all of these feelings and nuances. And like, sometimes the person who's used to engaging is like, wait, what? There are things that I have done. And it's like, both people participate in the relationship. And they think it's just a matter of like, they're just not hearing me versus like, there are things that I am not aware of. And so it's so fun. It's so dynamic. But I think the part that maybe sticks out to me the most is like that moment when a partner like feels seen.
Yeah.
Like when they've been holding on to something and they can't put in the right words. And that's the thing that's causing conflict because they need to get this thing out, but they can't find the right words. So they're just like continuously putting it into the wrong space. And then in this process with the three of us, either whether it's I get to translate back and be like, is this what I'm hearing? Or that once they've started to slow things down, right? So they're not getting so dysregulated, that there's this click. And it's like, and this just happened in one of my sessions yesterday where it's like, I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
I can hear that. I could not hear what you were doing before. In fact, I didn't want to be near what you were doing before. But that right there, what you just shared, that I heard.
That's gonna be
that's
gonna be amazing.
It is. It is. There's so much love. Like for all that we talk about divorces and infidelity, which does happen. I don't think that that's a whole nother topic we can get into one day. There's so much love. And there are just as many, and I feel maybe passionate about this, is that there's just as many men who want their relationships as women.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes, like, especially with social media and stuff, it's like this idea that like, I think the way I feel it sometimes is like men are just there and it's just like you just show up and it's about finally getting them to want to be in it. And I would say that that is not my experience as a therapist, is that they may not always know how to communicate. They may be afraid, they may be avoidant, but like men who are in relationships are not just in there because it's convenient. That like the men I've worked with, like they want their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
They want their their partners, their spouses, like, and I think that is something that has been really, really enjoyable to see. Is like, yeah, like I think it's just something that like has kind of when I look at social media, sometimes it feels very like sort of callous and cold of like
Yeah.
and putting people into like caricatures
Mm-hmm.
rather than looking at things as a whole, as a system. But within my office is like, yeah, they're often hurting just as much. They're often longing to be loved and heard and seen just as much. And also lacking a lot of the tools, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's everyone who's coming into that space is they're lacking tools. They're bringing in whatever crude tools that they learned growing up. Some worked, some didn't. And they're having to like go and say, "Oh yeah, that tool does not work for that."
Mm-hmm.
But it's really cool to watch them figure it out.
Yeah. I think in my house, so I have two boys and I have two girls. And I have said this for years that the world will be a better place when we have women who say what they want. They are assertive. They are direct. And that is a quality that is that is a quality that is respected, that is acknowledged, that is celebrated. The world will be a better place when we have more emotionally intelligent men, because the world as I see so in so many different ways right now is set up for men to peak in emotional maturity at around the age of 8 to 10. And then it becomes posturing, and then it becomes keeping up, and then it becomes suppressing, and then it becomes all of those pieces, and that it is not celebrated to have emotionally mature boys. But if you have a boy that is not given the space, the tools, the opportunity, all of those pieces at that age, you cannot expect to have an emotionally mature person with the ability, the tools, the capacity, the sort of the not the script, but the pieces that they need in order, the scaffolding to be able to have those emotionally mature relationships as a grown man. Because no one is ever going to come along in between late elementary school and when you're 30 years old and teach you, because it's just not, it doesn't make money. It doesn't do this. It doesn't, it's all of those pieces why it's really easy to avoid that trajectory. And so saying, like, I say this to I have a 9-year-old. I say this all the time, like, we're going to talk about feelings. And sometimes he'll be like, I don't have any feelings. And I'm like, untrue, untrue. Everyone has feelings, and your feelings matter. Her feelings matter. My feelings matter. Everyone's feelings matter. Your feelings don't have a gender. Feelings are feelings. And there is no expectation. There is actions, and those have expectations, but feelings don't have expectations, because that's who you are at the core. And you being aware of your feelings and what you're okay with and what you're not okay with is going to create the space and the opportunity for you to have people in your life that respect those feelings, that take care of those feelings, that acknowledge those feelings, so that you can grow into these relationships that are healthy, that you can have these conversations around. That's my soapbox.
I love what you're saying because so my son actually goes to an alternative education school, which does holistic learning. And one of the things they do is they have like a peace path where you like when you get in conflict, you work through these steps of like acknowledging and exploring what your feelings are, communicating them, and then resolving. And, you know, to see how he engages as compared to other young boys that I've seen and his friends engage, like it is profound.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you have access to all of your emotions, you are able to express yourself in a way that gets your needs met, but also doesn't then create this pressure cooker,
Yeah.
right? And I would say that that is one of the most prominent things that I see with like right my male clients is that I bottle up my emotions and I bottle them up until I can't bottle them up anymore. And one of two things, either I totally just shut down right? So like too much for me, so I'm just out. So I avoid, I run, I go the opposite direction because being in this place that's uncomfortable is hard
Mm-hmm.
and it's really, really icky. And so and the only thing that I can touch would be anger. I can't touch sadness. I can't touch guilt. I can't touch fear. You know, I like, then I just, then all has to go, or it goes into this bottle until literally the pressure is so big that it explodes.
Yeah.
And so being able to access the full spectrum of emotions is helpful for everyone.
Yeah.
That it's not just that I'm communicating, but also that I get my needs met and I get them met in a way that can be heard.
Yes.
Right. And that allows me to stay connected, and that does allow for vulnerability. But like, you know, I think that recognizing that vulnerability is one of the strongest things you can have in your toolbox, because that is really how you move, right? Like it's that moment when I see you and you see me and we connect, and then we decide to collaborate. That I'm no longer forcing you, I'm not dominating you, I'm not coercing you, but I can be like, man, what you want, what you need matters. And that comes when we can both be vulnerable in this space. And so I'm no longer, I just had this conversation with my partner, right? We had a little pickle about the AC, right? Where the AC should be. And, and part of the pickle was like, the way that at first he was saying, he was like, I wanted the AC change. And I was like, but when it comes out in a certain tone, I automatically am ready to defend myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that you want it changed and that you didn't feel heard, but like, because of the way it initially came out, I was like, well, I'm not doing it. I'm not touching it. It's going to stay there
forever.
Right. And then when he came back later, it was like, fine, what can we change it to? And that wall came down and we both put the weapons down and we're actually like, how do we do this together? And that's what I think happens when you access all of those emotions, because then people can hear you.
Yeah, and that's what you want. You want to be heard. You want to be seen. You want to be able to show up as your whole authentic self. Good, bad,
Yeah.
ugly, whatever it is. And it's about finding that connection with somebody who sees you for exactly who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you may not get right. It may not be your way, but oftentimes most people do not need it their way. They just need to know that you
Heard them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that you know what their way is, right? That there's room for their perspective, their opinion, their understanding of the world to exist. Like, I don't need it my way, but I need to know that like it can exist in this space.
Yeah. No.
Even if we don't choose that way, because then it becomes an option, right? And we can play with it, we can adapt and we can adjust. But when I don't feel heard, it's like my way's not even allowed in this room.
Right. The
Right? Like,
emotional bulldozer.
yeah.
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 My gosh, I love the work that you're doing. I just think that it is like, it is so needed. And it is so, I think that like the big takeaway, and it's not a surprise, but the thing that to remember is that everybody wants connection and everybody wants to be seen for their whole self. And everybody is a compilation of different buckets. And that when we can actually like, it's like, here are all my buckets and this one's empty and I need to fill it. And how am I going to do that? And then that person is these are my buckets. And that's when you really see it's like, I mean, I'm sure I'm dating myself, but like, you remember Pog when like when I was in elementary school, the little like
The pogs.
the little disc.
Yes.
And it's like
I found my box of them. It was it's ridiculous.
I still have mine. You're in really good company here. But it's this idea of like, do you remember having like I remember having like the little book and you had like all of the ones and they're like trading them and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, you have really cool ones. And then, everyone's
Especially if they're shiny.
oh, shiny. Yeah. Come on now.
Shiny and thick, right?
Yeah.
Versus the thin ones, it's like, oh, that's kind of papery.
Yeah. I don't want that. But that's what we're doing. We're trying, like, we're all walking around with our book of pogs and
Yeah.
love that. And trying to figure out, like, which ones we're going to hold on to and which ones we're going to trade and which ones we're going to share and all of that stuff. But, like,
Yeah.
there, it is what it is. Like, you have what you have. And so you just got to find somebody that's like, thinks your pogs are cool because you think their pogs are cool.
Yeah.
Run this metaphor.
I know. I love it, right? I mean, because that is, right? Like that is ultimately what we are doing, right? We are constantly figuring out like what works for me, what works for you, what works for us. And sometimes it doesn't work, right?
Yeah. And that's important
but
too. It doesn't have to work in order for it to work.
yeah. Yeah. I think and that being like so much of this stuff is like right, like once you like give it permission,
Mhm.
the toxicity of it, right, diminishes. Like once it's like, oh, things cannot work, things cannot fit, things can not be for me, not be for you. And any of these spaces that we've talked about today is like the moment we do that, like all of that toxicity can like diminish because then it's like, well, what will work?
Mhm.
Right now I have access to where should I go? What should I do? How do I want to do this?
I love it. I think like it's just that I applaud you like from the rooftops, but I also applaud that there are people who are saying, we want to do this differently. And so we are going to, because really that's the next generation, hopefully, of how this works is the people that say, we need to call somebody and we need to talk about this, or I need to talk about this or whatnot. So like, I honest to God, I hope your phone is ringing off the hook and your inbox is full because people are moving forward in those conversations, because those conversations, especially if those people are parents, eventually there is the trickle down that will actually work in this scenario, not in the economy, but there is a trickle down that that will actually work and it will lead to change, hopefully over time. And the more that we can do that and the more people that bring that out into the light, the quicker that's going to happen. And ultimately the healthier people are going to be in the long term.
Yeah, I think, right, like in doing this work, the thing that I always say is like customize the life you crave, right? You can customize this life. That it doesn't, we have to get off conveyor belts. Like I know, I think about like, big part of, that phase of life in America where everybody's working at factories. And I think there was just this sort of like creating a factory lifestyle in every area of your life. Like this is a package versus we're different. We have different cultures, different values, different beliefs, different opinions, different wants and needs. And you have to be able to start looking at like, how do I want to customize this?
Yeah.
Right. This one life, like I always say, like, I don't know about, reincarnation. If it exists, I don't remember it. So, from the very least, I can come from that standpoint of I am aware of this one life. I am aware of this one experience. And so how do I make the absolute most of it? And if something isn't working, how do I start reimagining what will?
Yeah.
Relationships that thrive are customized. Careers that thrive are customized. Friendships that thrive are customized. That it's not just, this is who I was friends with when I was 5, and so I'm going to be friends with them forever if it doesn't work. There's constant like evolution and adapting and refiguring, right? Or reconfiguring is better, like what will work. And so my hope is, right, as new couples come into being, is like, rather than being reactive to what doesn't work, is starting to really be explorative around what will,
Yeah.
and giving yourself permission to be like, you know what is it that I really need to feel, to fully step into me, right? And to fully step into us.
I feel like you just wrote like an entire bio for so many people out there to be like, this is what I want. Like, I want to distill it all down to me and see me for who I am and the things that I want
Mhm.
and need. All right,
Yeah.
you got to tell everyone where to find you because you're amazing, and I think that it's just it is the part of the change that is going to help so many people. So how do people connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on igniteanew.com. And then I am on Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok for while it's still available.
Right?
Who knows what will be happening. But I'd say I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram, or just coming straight to the website. Like I said, I do private workshops. I also do group ones and then host retreats. And you can also check out therapy if that's something that you want. Love sharing books. So there's some fun ones there too.
I love it. All right. I will put everything on the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.